Hey guys, this is Aaron from Repair Parts USA with another repair video for you today. Today we're going to be replacing the screen on an iPhone 6. So the first thing you want to do is remove the two bottom pentalobe screws next to the charging port of the phone. After that, you want to get a thin metal pry tool and slide it underneath the screen to pry up on the phone. If you're having trouble with this, you can use a suction cup to help you pry up on the screen. You want to work your way around the phone with the pry bar, being careful not to go too deep into the phone, as there are thin ribbon cables that you can damage or you can slice with your metal pry bar. Once it's pried up around the phone and the LCD is loose, you then want to open the iPhone 6, and it opens up like a book. After that, you want to disconnect the bottom metal bracket. This is where the battery connection is located. And with most, if not all repairs, the first thing you want to do is disconnect the battery. So once those screws are removed, we can take that metal bracket off. We use our plastic pick to disconnect the connector. And now that the battery is removed, we can then proceed to remove the screws that are connecting the front display of the phone to the motherboard of the iPhone 6. So there are 5 screws that we need to remove. When you're removing these screws, it's important to remember to keep them organized so that you remember where each screw goes. Once we get this last screw off, we can then take that metal bracket off. This is going to expose 4 connectors that are connected from the LCD of the phone to the motherboard of the iPhone 6. So we're going to use our metal pry tool, and we're going to pry up individually on each one of these connectors, being careful not to damage them. Once that is removed, we can set the phone aside, and then we're going to begin to remove the front display from the old LCD. Again, remember to make sure that your screws are organized so you can remember where they go when you're going to put back everything. Remove that metal bracket, and next we're going to fold the camera over and then take the loudspeaker out, and we're left with this display. There's a lot of thin ribbon cables here, so you want to be sure to be careful. We're going to use our metal pry tool to pry around it, kind of loosen a bit of the adhesive. Make sure you're gentle. These things can tear very easily. So again, just prying up, trying to get rid of some of the glue, or not get rid of it, but to loosen it, to remove this front-facing display. So there we have it. The display came loose. We're going to set that to the side. The next thing we want to work on is removing the back metal bracket. So there's a few screws on the edges that we're going to want to remove, so we can take that back metal bracket and transfer it to the new LCD. I believe all these screws are the same size, so it's not too important to remember where each one goes, but you want to make sure that you don't lose any of them, because you don't want that back metal bracket to be loose on the new LCD of your next phone. Next we're going to work on removing the home button. So we're going to take that back metal bracket off. There's 2 screws, one on each side. After those 2 are removed, you can lift that metal bracket off. Then there's a connector that connects the home button to the LCD. You want to be very careful. I like to use a thin metal pry tool again to slide it in between the 2 connections. It kind of pops off, and then we can work our metal pry tool underneath that home button and pry it up. Next thing we want to do is to remove that back display, and that home button connection that we just disconnected we're going to take with us, but it is glued down a little bit. So again, I'm using my metal pry tool and just working it around, getting that glue off, trying to loosen it. And there we go. It's come off. We're going to set the old LCD to the side. And now we're going to grab our new LCD and the phone. There we go. Turn it around. First thing we're going to do is put that old metal bracket back on it. So set it back into place, and we're going to start screwing it back in with the Y-tip screws. So you just want to make sure that the metal bracket lines up. It's pretty easy to do. And then just start screwing away. Alright, work over to the other side, do the same thing on the other side. Just put those screws back in. Want to make sure that this back plate is solid, that it's in place, because again there's thin parts back there that can move around, and it's not good if they get damaged. There we go. Next we're going to pop the home button back in. It just goes over into the hole, and then we're going to fold it over and connect those 2 cables. We're going to put the metal bracket back on and then screw that back into place. With the iPhone 6, the button, it is mechanical, and you want to make sure that it is put back in the right place, because it's going to be being pushed a lot. Next we're going to work up to the front camera and the earpiece speaker, all of that stuff. We're going to set that back into place. It is a little tricky to get it back into place, but there are pins, little plastic pins that can guide you, and there's holes in the ribbon cables where the pins need to go through, so it is easy to line it up. It does take a little bit of time because the cables fold over and they have to be in the exact right place in order for everything to work good. So I'm just pushing the the speaker and everything back in to place. And we're going to place that speaker in there, and then we're going to fold the camera over, and it's going to pop into that plastic hole right there. And that's going to hold, once I get it in there. And again, you can feel it pop in there. Might feel like you're pushing too hard, but you have to press pretty firmly, and you can feel it give. So once that's in there, it's going to hold it until we get the metal bracket back over there. I'm going to put the metal bracket over it, and then we're going to screw that back into place. And now our LCD is good to be connected to the phone. So we're going to take all those connections, and each one lines up with a specific connector. Goes back to the motherboard. So there is 4 different connectors that you have to put back on. It is a little bit crowded, so sometimes it's a little bit hard and it takes a bit of time to get each connector on. So I got one connection on, but something to note is that when you put the front-facing camera back on the new LCD, the ribbon cable that extends from it to connect to the motherboard needs to be behind the other 2 ribbon cables. You'll see what I'm talking about in a second, but I didn't do that, so I'm going to have to go back and fold it behind the other 2 cables just so it lines up and it'll work good. But again, not a big deal, just a minor setback. But yeah, just something to note. Right there, I'm folding it, that front camera ribbon cable, folding it behind the other 2 so they can all line up and all be connected. Because if you don't do that, then the front-facing camera connector is going to prevent you from being able to connect the other 2 ribbon cables. There we go. Now it's all lined up properly, but it still takes a little bit of time to connect each one of the cables. And there we go, all the cables are connected, so we're going to set the metal bracket back over it. And we're going to screw that back into place. You want to make sure all those connectors, you can feel them give. Sometimes you can hear a snap, but you'll know when they're connected. It'll give you a solid connection. It'll slide in or it'll give, but you'll be able to tell. So just make sure all those pop back into place nice and good. so everything works well with our new screen. There we go. Next, we're going to reconnect the battery. This is usually the last step we always do. Set the metal bracket back over it and screw that metal bracket back into place. Again, when you're doing repairs, it's just important to disconnect the battery to prevent any problems, short circuits and things such as that. And there we go. Now we're going to set that LCD back, slide it down, and just make sure it turns on. There we see the Apple logo, so I'm going to proceed to slide it back into place. And then just go around the edges, push it in, make sure everything's good. And it pops back into place pretty nicely. So you just want to, again, look for those pops. Make sure there's no parts of the screen around the edges sticking up. Then our last step is we're going to put those two bottom pentalobe screws back in and make sure that they're fastened. So there you guys have it. This is the iPhone 6 screen replacement, and thank you guys for watching.